Alright, we're going to start topic 2.4, which is segments and midpoints. And first we'll start with the definition of a midpoint. It's always a good place to start is with the definition. And so the definition of a midpoint is, let's see if this stylus I have is going to write, not very well apparently. Okay, a point, okay, on a segment that's an E, point on a segment, equidistant, so equidistant well, I'm not getting good stylus contact or something. Equidistant okay, from both endpoints. Okay, so that's your basic definition of a midpoint. A point on a segment equidistant from both endpoints. So in other words, if you have a segment, it's the point in the middle. Okay? So a point is the midpoint of a segment if it is between the two endpoints, and the distances from this point to each endpoint are equal. It's just another way to state the definition. Okay, so what we have then is these lines here. We have line segment PM, P and MQ, and line segment PQ. Well, point M is between P and Q, and point M is equally distant from P and Q. And what these marks mean when they are on a segment, they mean they're the same length. If they were different lengths, like one might have 2 slashes and one have 1 slash, but since they both have the 1 slash, that's not like a mark on a number line. That indicates the length of the segment. So segment PM, we can draw the conclusion that line segment PM is equal to line segment MQ because of those marks. Okay? And since PM equals MQ, then M is the midpoint of PQ because those distances are the same. So you can find the segment, the midpoint of a segment on a number line or a coordinate plane, and the basic equation is the same, and this is a good one to memorize. A plus B over 2. It's kind of like you're taking the average. The average of something is halfway between. Well, that's basically what you've got when you're doing a midpoint. So, find the coordinates of the midpoint of FG. Well, we have F at -3 and G at 3. So the midpoint is going to be -3 plus 3 divided by 2, and that equals 0 over 2, and 0 over anything is 0. So your midpoint is 0. Okay. Now in example 2, we want the coordinate of the midpoint of line segment AB. Well, A is at -3.5, so we want the midpoint is -3.5. Now be careful because M stands for slope a lot of the time, but this time it's midpoint. Plus 3, B is at 3, and we divide that by 2. When we take the difference here, we have -0.5 over 2, which is -1/4 Okay, so our midpoint is at negative 1/4. Okay, so this midpoint business is actually fairly straightforward and not difficult math at all. So let's look at example 3. If the coordinate of the midpoint of a segment AB on a number line is 3 and A is at negative 2, find the coordinate of B. Alright, well this is, we know the midpoint, okay, but we don't know B. So what you know on a number line, and you don't have to draw this picture, I'm going to draw it off here on the side, but if you look at your number line, we know that A is at negative 2, and we know that B is, the midpoint is at 3. This is A. And B is going to be over here somewhere, and that's what we're wanting to know. Where is B? So we know the midpoint this time. So think of your formula. M is equal to A plus B over 2. Okay? Now, if you're going to plug this in, what you have is your midpoint is at 3, and that equals negative 2 plus B over 2. Well, what you're going to do to solve that is you're going to multiply by 2 on both sides. So this, whoops, sorry, not that. This 2 cancels, and 2 times 3 will be 6 equals negative 2 plus B. And I need to make this look, I need to take away that cross out mark so it's not confusing when you go back and look at notes. We multiplied by 2 on both sides. These 2's on the right canceled. And so when we add 2 across to both sides, we have 6 plus 2 equals negative 2 plus B plus 2. So the 2's add to be 0 here, so B equals 8. And so that will be your answer. So it's possible you're going to know the midpoint A or B and have to solve for the other, or you have both endpoints A and B and you solve for the midpoint. Homework problems are going to have you go at it either way. Now what about the midpoint on a coordinate plane? That's a little different. So what you've got is you want the coordinates, you've got coordinates X and Y parts for, so I want to find the X coordinate in the midpoint and the Y coordinate in the midpoint, and so I end up with coordinates X and Y. And so what you have then is the X coordinate will be X1 plus X2 divided by 2, and your Y coordinate is going to be Y1 plus Y2 divided by 2. And so it's the same process. You just take each X, find the average between your X's, basically the midpoint, and the same thing with the Y's. So find the midpoint between negative 11, 3 and 8, negative 7. First decide which one you want to be, point 1 and point 2. So we'll say that this is point 1 and this is point 2. So that means this is X1 and Y1. And this is X2 and Y2. Okay? So finding the X midpoint then, finding the midpoint of my X's means I'm going to have negative 11 plus 8 divided by 2, which is negative 3 over 2, which is negative 1.5, and you can leave it either as a fraction or as a decimal. Personally, I don't know what Miss Van Omeren likes, but my personal preference is to leave it as the fraction. So for your Y's, you have positive 3. Take that off. We have 3 plus 7, negative 7, divided by 2. And so that's going to be negative 4 divided by 2, or negative 2. Okay. So the coordinates of your midpoint then, when you want to find your midpoint, it's a point on a graph, so it has xy, it's negative 3/2, negative 2. And that's your answer. Okay, same thing for this next one. They want the coordinates of the midpoint, and so we pick which is x1, and which is y1, and which is x2 and y2. Okay, and so then you do your equation or your formula. X midpoint for x will be 3 plus 7 over 2, or 10 over 2, which is equal to 5. And the midpoint for the y will be negative 6 plus 2 divided by 2, which is negative 4 divided by 2, or 2. So the midpoint between those two endpoints, the coordinates are 5, negative 2. Okay. Now let's look at our last two examples. We have M as the midpoint, and you've got the coordinates. This is like that last example when we did just the straight two endpoints. We know the midpoint, we know A, we need to find B. So again, what we've got is x1 and y1, and we know xm and ym, and we need to find x2 and y2. So you say that, again, you look back at your formula. So we have xm is equal to x1. If you go back and look, x1 plus x2 over 2. So let's go here. x1 plus x2 over 2. And so we know xm is 3 equals x1 is 0 plus x2 over 2, multiplied by 2 on both sides. So when you do that, those 2's cancel out to be 1. So you have 6 equals 0 plus x2. Well, I'll subtract 0 across, so x2 is 6. Then we're going to do the same thing for y. Formula. Now let's put the numbers in. We know that ym is 5, y1 is 1 plus y2 over 2, multiply by 2 on both sides. So those 2's cancel to be 1. 10 is equal to 1 plus y2. So I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. So that adds to be 0 on the right. 10 minus 1 is 9 for y2. We've solved now for x2 and y2. So the coordinates for point B are 6, 9. And so that would be the coordinates for point B. Alright, let's do the same thing on example 7. Here is your midpoint. And here is your Q. Now you could make this x2 and y2 if you want to, but we'll make it x1 and y1. And then do the same thing. We're going to look for x2 is what we're going to solve for here. So to do that, you're going to have your midpoint, 4, is equal to 3 plus x2 over 2. When I multiply by 2 on both sides, you have 2 times 4 equals 3 plus x2. Now I shortcut that a little bit. I didn't show that these 2's mark out, but from previous problems, hopefully you know they do. So 8 is equal to 3 plus x2. When you subtract 3 from both sides, 5 equals x2. Same thing for y. Okay, so the midpoint is negative 1 equals negative 2 plus y2 over 2. I'll show it this time. Multiply by 2 on both sides. This multiplies or cancels to be 1. So you have negative 2 is equal to negative 2 plus y2. When you add 2 to both sides, what happens, these both are going to add to be 0. So 0 equals y2. And you have to realize it's okay to get 0. 0 is an answer. Sometimes we think, oh gosh, I got 0. That can't be right, but it can be. Alright, so the answer here for point R, the coordinates are 5, 0. And that is the presentation on midpoints. I know it went rather quickly, but if you have, you should have plenty of time to work on your homework. And if you have questions, go back and review the video.